A group of high school bullies thought she was just another teacher they could push around, until she stood still, looked them dead in the eye, and everything changed. Keisha Trammell had seen the job listing by chance. A late-night scroll through teaching boards, a tired click, and then a pause. Logan High School. Logan, Missouri. She didn't know much about the town, only that it was small and far from everything she'd grown up around in Oakland. But the listing offered stability, tenure track, and full creative control over her curriculum. For a literature teacher with a master's degree and nearly 10 years of inner-city classroom experience, it felt like a good fit. On paper. But paper doesn't show people's faces. Her first morning at Logan High began under a pale sky and a stiff wind. The parking lot was mostly pickups and older sedans, some with rusted doors and NRA bumper stickers. She stepped out of her car wearing a pressed blazer, jeans, and low-heeled boots. Nothing flashy. She didn't want attention, just enough structure to feel strong. Inside the school, a secretary named Paula handed her a schedule with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Room 209, upstairs by the science labs," she said. "Staff lunch is in the lounge by the gym. You'll figure it out." Keisha thanked her and headed to her classroom, heels clicking on waxed tile. She passed trophy cases full of wrestling medals, deer antlers mounted beside state championship plaques, and a faded American flag from the Gulf War. Then came the eyes. A pair of students leaning by the vending machine paused mid-sentence as she passed. A boy in a varsity jacket elbowed his friend. They laughed. Quiet, but not private. A group of girls walking out of the restroom went silent as she approached. And when she entered her classroom for the first time, she caught it in the reflection of the window, one of the janitors staring, lips parted, before he looked away. She closed the door behind her and exhaled slowly. The classroom itself was plain. Rows of grey desks. Fluorescent lights that buzzed slightly. But she brought life with her. Laminated quotes, a poster of Maya Angelou, her books. Native Son, The Bluest Eye, The Fire Next Time. She set them out on the desk slowly, each one feeling heavier than it should. The first class began at 8:05. They trickled in, juniors mostly, some seniors. Staring. Not all of them rude, but guarded. A few avoided eye contact completely. Then came Brad Wilcox. Blonde, lean. Letterman jacket zipped halfway. Ball cap flipped backwards, boots heavy on the floor. He walked in like the classroom was his, even though she'd never met him before. Behind him was Colton Myers, stocky, red-faced, chewing gum with his mouth open, and Tanner Reed, who kept his eyes on his phone the whole time. Brad took a seat right up front, slouched low, legs stretched out wide. "You the new sub?" he asked, his voice loud and clear. Keisha smiled politely. "I'm your new literature teacher, Ms. Trammell." He didn't answer, just leaned back further, chewing imaginary gum like Colton. The boys snickered, but Keisha wasn't new to classroom games. She kept it moving. "Today we're talking about stories, how they shape us, how we use them to understand people who aren't like us." She let that hang in the air. Then she asked them to write 3 sentences about a story, any story, that changed the way they saw something. A book, a movie, a song lyric, a conversation. Some scribbled immediately. Others stared. Brad raised his hand halfway through. "Does Call of Duty count as a story?" The class chuckled. Keisha walked to his desk and leaned gently on it, enough to close the gap but not invade. "Sure," she said. "If it changed you, if you can tell me why." Brad didn't answer, but his smirk faded. By the end of the day, Keisha had made it through all 5 periods. No one threw anything. No one shouted, but the silence in the halls told its own story. She was not welcome, not yet. But as she sat alone in her car before driving home, she told herself one thing. She had seen worse, and she hadn't come this far to fold early. Keisha arrived 15 minutes early every morning that first week, hoping to create a rhythm. A place like Logan, she figured, ran on routine. Get there early. Smile often. Stay sharp. Stay calm. She memorized student names by Tuesday. She brought her own markers because the classrooms were dried out. She even baked banana bread on Wednesday night and set a plate of neatly sliced squares on her desk the next morning with a handwritten sign, "Take one," or two. By Friday, only 2 pieces had been taken. One by a shy girl named Leah, who whispered, "Thank you," and rushed out the door. The other? A custodian. Not a single teacher commented. Still, Keisha smiled. Always. She knew smiles didn't always return, but they softened lines. And she wasn't looking for approval, just space to teach. But by week 2, the small things started showing up. A printed schedule left in her mailbox with her name misspelled. Ms. Trammell. No L, no correction. A subtle pause when she entered the staff lounge, like someone had been talking and didn't want to anymore. An email thread about curriculum changes that every teacher was CC'd on, except her. And then there were the notes. At first, she thought she imagined it. A yellow sticky stuck to the edge of her desk after lunch with a single word. Token. She held it for a while before peeling it in half and throwing it away. She didn't say anything. The second one came 2 days later, scribbled on the back of a quiz paper, circled in pencil. Hope you can run fast. That one she saved, quietly, tucked into a folder at home with a date and time. She considered going to Principal Odom, but something in her gut stopped her. It wasn't just fear, it was calculation. She needed to know what she was up against before making waves. On Thursday, during 4th period, she caught Brad whispering with Colton and Tanner. All 3 hunched over Tanner's phone, snickering. The moment she turned their way, they stopped. Phone's away, she said evenly. Now. Brad smiled wide and exaggerated, like a kid pretending to be polite. He tucked his phone in his back pocket and leaned on his elbows. Yes, ma'am, he said, dragging the word out like a challenge. Later that day, she saw Tanner in the hallway. He passed her without a word, but as he did, he muttered under his breath, Can't wait to see how long you last. Keisha stopped walking. Her hand gripped her keys tighter, but her face didn't move. She turned slowly, looked back, but he'd already blended into the crowd. That night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She called her sister back in Oakland, debated saying anything, then decided against it. What would she say? That she felt like a target but had no proof? That it was all quiet hostility, invisible scratches? She wasn't afraid. Not exactly. But she was tired. And it had only been 2 weeks. Friday morning brought rain. Students tracked wet footprints into the building, and Keisha stood at her classroom door, watching the patterns. She greeted everyone who passed. Some mumbled hello. Others didn't even blink. When Brad walked by with his hood up, he turned just slightly and looked her dead in the eye. You look tense, he said, like it was an inside joke. Keisha didn't flinch. She met his stare and gave a small nod. Not of agreement, but acknowledgement. Don't be late, she said. He showed up on time. Sat quietly, even raised his hand once, though it was to ask a sarcastic question about beloved being too sad to be literature. She didn't react, just replied, Sad stories are sometimes the truest ones, and moved on. But the class shifted that day. Something hard to define. Less noise, fewer smirks. She couldn't tell if it was the weather or something else, but she was watching. And when the final bell rang and she walked to her car, there was a new note tucked under her windshield. This time, typed, You're not wanted here. It was a Tuesday, the kind that's so normal it almost tricks you into thinking things are fine. Keisha had just wrapped up her 3rd period class on symbolism in Their Eyes Were Watching God. It had gone well. Leah actually volunteered to read out loud, and a boy named Joaquin had made a sharp comment about the pear tree metaphor. Tiny wins, but they meant something. She stayed behind a few minutes after the bell, erasing the board, straightening a stack of assignments, giving herself space to breathe. On her way to the teacher's lot, she stopped at the vending machine by the gym to grab a bottle of water. She didn't see Brad and Tanner at first. They were standing just out of view, behind a pillar near the loading zone, talking to 2 boys from the track team. The conversation was casual, but loud. As Keisha got closer, she caught the tail end of it. I'm just saying, Brad said. You can't say nothing these days without someone getting offended. It's like you breathe wrong and they cry racism. Tanner laughed too hard at that. One of the track kids looked uncomfortable. Keisha didn't say anything. She kept walking. But the silence between steps, her steps, must have caught Brad's attention. He turned and saw her. His eyes lit up like he'd been handed a stage. "Hey there, Ms. Diversity Hire," he called out, voice ringing across the lot. Keisha stopped. For 1 second. She looked at him. Didn't blink. Didn't smile. Then turned and kept walking to her car. Behind her, Brad kept going. "No comment? You just gonna walk away? That's not very inclusive of you," he said, laughing to himself. Keisha unlocked her door, got in, and pulled the door shut behind her. She sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from Leah. No words, just a link. Keisha clicked it. A video. Less than a minute long. She watched herself walking through the lot, heard Brad's voice clear as day. The caption read, "Guess who's woke and broke?" It had been posted on a burner account that someone created just for moments like this, and it already had over 40 shares. Her thumb hovered over the report button, but instead, she saved it to her device. That evening, she poured herself a cup of tea, sat at her kitchen table, and watched the video 3 more times. Each time, something different landed. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone. The pack mentality. The complete lack of fear or consequence in his voice. She could have cried, but she didn't. Instead, she went to her hallway closet, opened the old wooden chest she hadn't touched in years, and pulled out a thick black belt with faded embroidery. Her name, in yellow thread, Keisha J. Trammell. Under it, Nidan, 2nd-degree black belt. She hadn't trained in almost 3 years. Life had gotten in the way. Graduate school, student loans, work, a knee injury. But the body remembers. She rolled the belt in her hand and closed her eyes. Just for a second, she pictured herself back in the dojo. Bare feet, steady breath, no noise, just motion and focus. The next morning, she wore black slacks and a soft denim shirt to work. No makeup, hair pulled back tight. As she passed the lockers, students moved aside instinctively. Not fear, just a shift, like they sensed something had changed. Her posture, maybe. Her gaze. She wasn't angry, just clear. At lunch, a substitute teacher named Mr. Krause slid into the seat beside her in the lounge. "You all right?" he asked. Keisha nodded. "I'm fine." He hesitated. "Saw that video. Thought it was disgusting. You gonna report it?" She shrugged. "Already saved it." He paused. "Some of us have your back. Just so you know." Keisha gave him a quiet look. "That's good to hear." She didn't say thank you. Not because she wasn't grateful, but because she was tired of thanking people for basic decency. But that night, when she got home, she didn't pour tea. She rolled out a yoga mat and began stretching the old way. Hips, ankles, neck, wrists. Slowly, thoughtfully, like someone preparing, but not for a fight. For control. Principal Leonard Odom wore cufflinks every day. Always silver, always polished. His tie knots were sharp and his smile too wide, the kind that didn't reach past the teeth. He wasn't hostile, not exactly, but Keisha could feel the distance from the first handshake. She had waited until Thursday to request the meeting. The parking lot video had made its rounds, mostly among students. A few teachers whispered about it too, just loud enough for her to hear and pretend she hadn't. When she stepped into Odom's office, she didn't expect a miracle. Just clarity. He motioned to the chair across from his desk without standing. "Ms. Trammell, come in. Everything all right?" Keisha sat slowly, placing a folder on her lap. "I wanted to talk about something that happened earlier this week," she said. "There was an incident in the student parking lot involving Brad Wilcox. It was filmed and shared online." Odom's expression shifted, just barely. A flicker of recognition. He knew. "Right. Yes, that came across my desk yesterday." Keisha waited for more. None came. "I've saved the video," she said. "In it, Brad refers to me as a diversity hire in front of other students. He yells it across the parking lot. I didn't engage, but it was loud, public, intentional. Odom tapped his fingers against the desk. I saw the clip. Brad has a big personality, but I wouldn't assign malice just yet. Keisha's jaw tensed. This isn't about malice, she said, careful. It's about respect and precedent. He leaned back in his chair. You're new here, Miss Trammell. Sometimes it takes a little while to acclimate. You know how kids are. They test people, especially new teachers. And especially black ones? She asked, her voice even. He blinked. Let's not make this about race. Keisha let the silence stretch for a moment, just long enough to be uncomfortable. I didn't make it about race, Mr. Odom. Your student did. He glanced toward the window, cleared his throat. Listen, I'll have a conversation with Brad and his parents. He's had a couple behavioral issues before, but his record's clean overall. Keisha opened her folder and slid the printout of the video across the desk. A screenshot from the video frozen at the exact frame, Brad's mouth wide open mid-yell, her figure in the background walking away. I'd like something in writing, she said, to document the incident, for future reference. Odom looked at the paper but didn't pick it up. We don't usually put informal student behavior issues in writing unless they're repeat offenses. Then consider this the first one, she replied. He studied her face. For the first time, she saw him calculating. Not how to help, but how to manage. Are you sure this is the route you want to take? He asked. It might escalate things. Keisha sat still. I'm not escalating. I'm documenting. Another long pause. I'll note it, he said finally. But I'd encourage you to focus on building rapport with the students. Sometimes when they see you're not easily rattled, they back off on their own. She stood up, slow and calm, picked up her folder, slid the chair back into place. Thank you for your time, she said. As she walked out, she heard him say, almost too low to catch, kids these days, always looking to be offended. She didn't turn around. That afternoon, during fifth period, she changed her seating chart, moved Brad to the back, Tanner to the front. She didn't announce it, just handed out new assignments with the updated layout printed clearly. A few students glanced at each other, surprised, but no one challenged her. After class, Joaquin lingered at his desk. You okay, Ms. Trammell? She raised an eyebrow. Why wouldn't I be? He hesitated. You just seem different. Keisha looked at him carefully. Different how? He shrugged. Just strong, I guess. She didn't reply, but she gave him the slightest nod as he left. But as the door clicked shut behind him, she realized that strong wasn't the compliment he thought it was. It was a test, and the test wasn't over yet. It was raining again. Not a downpour, just that steady kind of rain that soaks your collar before you notice. Students shuffled through the hallways after lunch with their heads low and hoods up, wet shoes squeaking on the floor. Keisha stood outside her classroom door as usual, greeting the ones who looked up, mentally scanning for any sign of change. That was when she saw Evan Lyles. He was a freshman, small, soft-spoken, always walking with his head down. He'd visited her classroom once after school to ask about the extra credit reading list. Quiet but curious. The kind of kid who blends in until something pushes him out of the frame. And something was off now. He was backed into the space between two lockers, cornered by Brad and Colton. Tanner stood off to the side, arms crossed, like he was waiting for something to happen. She didn't hesitate. Keisha walked toward them without raising her voice. Evan? She said clearly. You all right? All three boys turned. Brad grinned. We're just talking. Relax. Evan's eyes flicked toward her, then back to the floor. His body looked stiff, one shoulder pressed awkwardly against the locker. Keisha took a step closer, her heels tapping once. Firm. I asked him a question. Brad's smile didn't move. He didn't say anything was wrong. Keisha looked straight at Evan. If you need to go, go. You've got 5 minutes before the bell. Evan didn't move. That's when Brad took a small step toward her. Not aggressive, not theatrical, just enough to shrink the space between them. You always this nosy, Ms. T? He asked, mock gentle. Or just when it's your kind? The hallway went quiet. Even Tanner flinched at that one. Keisha's posture didn't change, but something in her face did. She stepped forward slowly, calmly, until she was less than 2 feet from Brad. Her chin didn't lift, but her eyes held his completely. "You don't want to do this," she said softly. He laughed. "Do what?" But he stopped moving. He shifted his weight to his other foot, almost imperceptibly. Keisha didn't touch him. She didn't have to. Her shoulders were squared, arms loose at her sides, stance grounded. It was the stance of someone who knew exactly what her body could do if she needed to. Brad's smile faltered for the first time. Behind her, the security camera on the ceiling blinked red. Keisha spoke again, quiet enough that only the boys heard her. "I've spent over a decade training in Shotokan. That's Japanese karate, if you're curious. I don't fight students, but I protect students." She glanced at Evan. "So unless you want to explain to your parents why the school footage shows you cornering a 14-year-old while threatening a teacher, I suggest you walk away." Brad didn't move right away. Colton shifted beside him. Tanner muttered something about being late and started walking. Finally, Brad stepped back. He raised both hands. "Whatever," he muttered. "We weren't doing anything." Evan squeezed out from between them and walked to her side without a word. Keisha waited until all 3 boys were out of sight. Then she turned to Evan. "You good?" He nodded. "Yeah." "You sure?" He hesitated. "They've been messing with me since orientation. It's nothing." She crouched slightly to meet his eye level. "It's not nothing. You come to me anytime, all right? Or Mr. Fielding in guidance, or Officer Hughes. Don't let them make you feel small." Evan nodded again, this time with a little more weight. She let him go to class, then walked slowly back to her room. Later that day, the assistant principal called her in. Someone had flagged the incident from the hallway camera. Apparently, a substitute down the hall had seen it from his room and alerted the office. Keisha gave her account calmly, without emotion. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't dramatize. By the next morning, Brad, Colton, and Tanner were pulled into the office. She never found out what was said. But by third period, Brad didn't look at her once. Colton muttered something under his breath but avoided eye contact. Tanner looked different. Not scared, but thoughtful. But Keisha wasn't focused on them anymore. She had seen something else, something small but real, in the way Evan stood up straighter that day. And sometimes that's where change begins. It took less than 48 hours for the footage to make its way to the district office. Apparently, after Keisha's hallway encounter with Brad, Colton, and Tanner, the substitute who had witnessed it, Mr. Krause again, submitted a written statement. He hadn't seen everything, but what he caught was enough to raise concern. 3 senior boys surrounding a freshman, Ms. Trammell stepping in, and the tension that followed. By Friday morning, Keisha received an email marked confidential from Assistant Principal Darlene Finch requesting a private meeting. When she arrived, Darlene was already seated behind a large desk with a stack of printed stills pulled from the hallway camera. Keisha sat across from her without speaking. "You handled yourself professionally," Darlene said, flipping the top page. "We reviewed the footage." Keisha leaned forward slightly. "And?" "Well," Darlene continued, "it's clear you de-escalated what could have been a serious incident. The footage confirms you never touched anyone, and Evan corroborated everything. Said you stepped in when no one else would." That last part hit her harder than she expected. "We're bringing the boys in separately today," Darlene added. "Parents, too. Principal Odom wanted me to keep you informed, though he's not sitting in on this round." Keisha raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" Darlene hesitated. "He thinks your presence might heighten tension." "His words?" Keisha nodded slowly. "Of course." There was a pause, long enough for Darlene to check if Keisha might challenge it. She didn't. "Not yet. We are drafting a formal notice," Darlene said, sliding a document across the desk. "This will go into each of their files." Keisha read it in silence. It was short, but direct. Aggressive behavior toward a faculty member. Attempted intimidation of a younger student. Administrative warning issued. It wasn't justice, but it was something. As Keisha stood to leave, Darlene said quietly, For what it's worth, a lot of teachers wouldn't have said anything. You did right. Keisha gave a faint smile. Right doesn't always win popularity contests. Back in her classroom, the day passed slowly. Word spread fast. Students didn't say much directly to her, but the shift was visible. The usual chatter before class faded. Heads stayed lower. Phones stayed pocketed. During fifth period, a student named Nick raised his hand and asked if they could discuss the concept of power of mice and men. It wasn't on the lesson plan, but she let it happen. The conversation was clunky at first, but then a girl named Olivia added something honest. I think power is about how people choose to use fear, she said. Like, if they know they can hurt someone and get away with it. Keisha gave a slight nod. And what do you call it when someone refuses to use fear, even when they could? Olivia blinked. I don't know. Strength? Exactly, Keisha said. Not fear. Strength. That night, she got a phone call from Evan's mother. I just wanted to say thank you, the woman said. He told me what happened. He was quiet for weeks, and now he's talking, like himself again. Keisha thanked her, but made no big deal of it. She never wanted attention, just a classroom where everyone felt safe enough to learn. By Monday, things were different. Brad no longer smirked. He walked in quietly, sat near the back, and kept his phone in his bag. Tanner raised his hand twice during discussion. Colton barely spoke. Some students began saying hello in the hallway. A few even smiled. It wasn't celebration, it was recalibration. A rebalancing of the room's gravity. She overheard one student whisper, "Don't mess with Ms. Trammell. She's got that Bruce Lee energy." She let them believe whatever they wanted. She didn't correct them, because the truth wasn't about physical power. It was about presence, about showing you're not afraid to stand your ground when the moment asks for it. But respect earned that way is never the end of the story. It's the start of something harder, being watched, being measured, being tested all over again. By Tuesday, Logan High had gone quiet around Keisha, not hostile anymore, but unsure. The kind of quiet that follows a power outage, when people aren't sure if the lights are coming back on or if they need to adapt to the dark. Students still filed into her classroom. They still took notes. They still mumbled answers when called on. But now, they watched her. Not just Brad, Colton, and Tanner. All of them. Eyes followed her when she wrote on the board. Conversation slowed when she walked past. Even students who hadn't said a word to her before now sat straighter in their seats. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was recognition. In schools like Logan, rumors moved faster than announcements. And the story, what happened in the hallway with Evan, had taken on a life of its own. Some versions said she'd thrown Brad against a locker. Others claimed she knew jiu-jitsu and had trained with the police. She didn't bother correcting any of it. Let them wonder. At lunch, she sat alone again. Not because no one offered a seat, but because the staff room felt tighter now. Like every comment came with a second meaning. Like people were still figuring out which side of the line they were supposed to stand on. She didn't need their closeness, just their professionalism. That afternoon, she stayed after school to grade papers. A knock at her door interrupted her around 3:30. It was Evan. He held a folded piece of notebook paper. I wrote something, he said, barely meeting her eyes. Come in, Keisha said, waving him toward a desk. He sat, unfolded the paper, and handed it to her. It was a short story, 2 pages, typed, about a boy who finds a broken compass and learns that even though it doesn't point north, it still leads him to safety. Keisha read it slowly, then looked at him. This is strong, she said. Really strong. Evan smiled for the first time. It's based on you. She blinked. The compass? Yeah. Not perfect, he said, but still knows where it's going. Keisha wasn't the crying type, but something in her chest knotted a little. I think you're going to be a great writer, she said softly. Just keep trusting your own voice. He nodded, and left without another word. As the week went on, more students started staying after class, some just to ask about assignments. Others lingered, clearly trying to say more than they knew how. One girl, Tabitha, asked if she could borrow the bluest eye for a project she hadn't even been assigned. Another, Marisol, brought her tea from the teacher's lounge. They had peppermint today, she said, pretending it was casual. By Friday, even the silence felt different. It wasn't cold anymore. It was careful. People were listening now, waiting to see what she'd do next. And so was Brad. He hadn't said anything since the hallway incident. Not a single joke. Not a glance too long. He showed up on time, turned in work, even nodded occasionally when she gave instructions, but he still sat with his crew at lunch, still wore that same smug look when he thought no one was watching. It was a pause, not a change, and Keisha knew it. Still, she let the tension sit, let it teach, let the school sit with the fact that something had shifted, and not in the way they expected. Because they couldn't label her now, not just new, not just black, not just outsider. She was none of those things, and all of them at once. And she wasn't going anywhere. But sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's strategy. And when people finally stop laughing, you get the space to start teaching. The vending machines near the gym hadn't worked properly in years. They buzzed, stalled, and often kept the dollar bills without giving anything in return. But students still tried their luck, mostly out of habit. Keisha walked past them on her way to the faculty lot one afternoon when she saw him. Brad Wilcox. Alone, standing in front of the snack machine, pressing the same button 3 times, even though nothing moved. He glanced over his shoulder and saw her. She didn't change her pace. "Miss Trammell," he said, stepping to the side. She stopped, only because something in his voice lacked the usual swagger. "What is it, Brad?" He rubbed the back of his neck, looked down at the floor. The hallway was empty except for them. The hum of the machine flickered, then stopped. "I guess I should say something." Keisha raised one eyebrow. "You guess?" Brad looked up briefly, then back at his boots. "I didn't mean all of it. The stuff I said. I was just messing around." "That's not what Evan said." His mouth tightened. "I wasn't going to hit him or anything. We were just intimidating him?" He didn't answer. She waited. Finally, he said, "You don't know what it's like here. This place, it's small. Everybody's stuck. You try to act like you're above it. People notice. People talk." Keisha's arms folded. "So what? That gives you permission to drag people down with you?" He flinched slightly. "It's not like that." "Then what's it like?" Brad glanced at the vending machine again, like it might save him. "My dad told me you probably got this job because of quotas," he said. "Said they had to hire someone like you sooner or later." Keisha didn't blink. "And you believed him?" He shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe. At first." She looked at him carefully. There was no apology yet, just explanation. But explanations, when honest, could be the beginning of something. "I worked for this job," she said, "harder than most people ever had to. And I didn't come here to change the town. I came to teach. You don't have to like me, but you will respect the space I create in my classroom." "That's not a request." Brad nodded slowly, not defiant this time, just thinking. After a long pause, he mumbled, "Sorry for the parking lot thing. That was messed up." There it was. She didn't give him a gold star, didn't pat him on the back, just said, "Thank you," and turned to leave. But he called out again, quieter this time. "You really do know karate?" She turned back, expression unreadable. "Second-degree black belt." Brad gave a short laugh, but it wasn't mocking. More like he didn't know what else to do with that information. "That explains a lot," he said. "The way you stood that day. I felt like I blinked, and you were taller." Keisha gave the faintest smile. "You don't need a black belt to command a room, but it helps when people forget how to behave." That night, Keisha replayed the conversation in her mind. It wasn't redemption. Brad hadn't changed overnight, but something cracked open. Something honest had slipped out of his performance, and that counted for more than she expected. The next day, he participated in discussion for the first time. They were reviewing the house on Mango Street, talking about identity and environment. Brad raised his hand, tentatively. He said, I think sometimes where you grow up tries to decide who you're allowed to be. And some people believe that's all there is. A few students turned to look at him. Keisha nodded slowly. That's a powerful observation. You think that's what the book's saying? Or what life taught you? He shrugged. Both. She let the silence linger this time. Not to fill it, but to let it stretch into the room like sunlight. But one moment of clarity doesn't rewrite the past. It just gives you a new page to start from. And for Brad Wilcox, that was more than anyone thought he'd ever ask for. By early March, the air had started to shift in more ways than one. The worst of winter was behind them, and the days stretched a little longer, spilling gold across the parking lot when school let out. But what stood out most wasn't the weather. It was how people looked at Keisha now, not with suspicion, not with distance, with curiosity. After the hallway incident and Brad's quiet apology, students had grown more open. Not suddenly warm, but less guarded. The change wasn't loud, it was slow, steady, and built from fragments. A question here, a pause there. A notebook left behind, returned with a polite "thank you." Then came the request. Coach Delaney from the girls' soccer team stopped her one morning near the front office. "You've got good presence," he said. "The girls talk about you. You ever taught self-defense?" Keisha paused. "I've trained. Taught a few workshops before." He scratched his head. "Would you be willing to run one here? Just something informal after practice one day? A few of them have been asking." That caught her off guard. "Sure," she said after a second. "I'd be happy to." It happened the next Thursday. 15 girls stayed after soccer practice, still in cleats and shin guards, gathered in the gym with water bottles and restless energy. Keisha wore sneakers and sweatpants, her hair tied back tight. She didn't perform. She instructed, showed them how to position their feet, how to use their voice as a deterrent, where to strike if they absolutely had to. "I don't teach people how to fight," she told them. "I teach people how to keep themselves from needing to." They listened. They asked questions. Some laughed nervously. A few stayed behind after to thank her. "I didn't know teachers did stuff like this," one girl, Marissa, said, lacing up her backpack. "We don't," Keisha replied, "but people do." That one sentence spread, and by the next week, 2 junior boys stayed after class to ask if they could do their literature project on the autobiography of Malcolm X, even though it wasn't on the syllabus. "Do you think he was angry?" one of them asked. Keisha smiled. "I think he was honest, and people called that anger because they didn't like hearing it." They nodded. They got it. In the staff lounge, even the conversations shifted. A few teachers asked about the self-defense class. Ms. Reiner from biology said, "Heard you've got the kids thinking twice about more than just homework." Keisha didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Respect earned through fear fades fast. But respect earned through example, that stays. It builds. One afternoon, Tanner's younger sister, Kennedy, knocked on her door after the final bell. She looked nervous. "Can I ask something personal?" she said. "Of course," Keisha replied. "Do you ever wish you'd just ignored all the stuff they said to you? Like, just stayed quiet so it wouldn't be a thing?" Keisha thought for a moment. "No," she said. "I'd rather speak up and risk being misunderstood than stay quiet and feel invisible." Kennedy didn't say anything right away, but she nodded, then asked for a recommendation for a women's history paper. Keisha handed her a copy of Atsata and told her to start there. At home that evening, Keisha sat on her couch, cross-legged, her laptop resting on a cushion. She opened an email from the district office, an invitation to join a diversity and equity roundtable. "We believe your voice would add value," it said. She closed the laptop without replying yet, not because she wasn't honored, but because she wanted to think. This whole journey hadn't been about proving herself. It had been about protecting her right to exist fully, without apology, in a space that wasn't built for her. And slowly, without force, she'd carved that space open, not just for herself, but for the students watching from the edges. But she knew this kind of respect came with weight, and every step forward meant you had to hold that space open, not just for yourself, but for the ones coming next. By the last week of the semester, something had settled. Not comfort, not ease, but stability. The kind that comes after a storm when everything's still damp but standing. Keisha walked through the hallways of Logan High with the same posture she'd arrived with, head up, steps firm. But now, the school saw her differently. She wasn't a curiosity anymore, or a problem, or a test. She was a teacher, their teacher. Evan dropped by every Monday to show her new story drafts. He was working on a short piece about a girl who builds a boat with no nails, only knots. Keisha told him it was beautiful. He smiled like she'd handed him a trophy. Leah started helping her reorganize the class library during lunch, quietly rearranging titles by theme. So kids don't just grab the easiest ones, she explained. And Brad? He didn't become a new person overnight, but he kept showing up. On time. Present. A few days before finals, he stayed after class. Not to joke or apologize again, just to talk. My mom said you're probably the only person who actually made me think this year, he told her. That you got in my head. Keisha closed her gradebook and looked up. And what do you think? He scratched his cheek, shrugged. I think you don't take crap from anyone, but you don't throw it back either. That's rare. She didn't respond right away. Just watched him. You gonna be here next year? He asked. Planning to, she said. He nodded and walked out. It wasn't fanfare. It wasn't redemption. But it was real. And that meant more. On the final day of school, as the last bell rang, Keisha stood by her classroom door, watching students file out one last time. Some waved. A few gave side hugs. One left a folded note on her desk that simply read, "You made me feel seen." After everyone had gone, she sat alone at her desk. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the old wall clock. Outside, teachers were chatting by their cars. A soccer ball bounced once against the gym doors. She let herself breathe. This job had asked a lot of her, not just energy or patience, but restraint, courage, and control. It had tested the lines between presence and silence, pride and professionalism, dignity and endurance. But she'd met each moment with her full self. Not diluted, not simplified, and in doing so she had carved a new path through the school's hardened routines. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out toward the field. Evan was there, kicking a ball with another freshman. Laughing, loose, free. Behind her, the classroom felt warmer somehow. Lived in. That evening, she got a message from Kennedy, Tanner's sister. It read, "Your quote about not being invisible. I used that in my paper. Got an A. Thank you." Keisha smiled to herself. Not a wide smile, just the kind that lingers in the corners of the eyes. She picked up her karate belt from the bookshelf. Not to show it, just to remember. Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, consistent, worn like armor no one can see. She thought about how easily she could have walked away in the beginning, and how different things would have looked if she had, not just for her, but for every kid in that building watching to see if standing up was worth the risk. She stayed, she taught, and she left a mark that wouldn't fade. Not because she demanded it, because she earned it. And if there's one thing this story should remind us, it's this. Strength doesn't always look like a fight. Sometimes it looks like staying. Sometimes it looks like teaching anyway. And sometimes it looks like a woman refusing to shrink just because the room isn't ready. If this story moved you, even just a little, share it. Tell someone. And if you want more stories like this, real and raw and worth thinking about, subscribe. Because stories shape the world, and we all deserve to be seen in them.